Welcome to the August 2021 CIECAST, How Activating AI in Network Connections is Redefining Claims and Repair Experiences. I'm Paul Berry, Executive Director of CIECA. The Collision Industry Electronic Commerce Association, or CIECA, develops and promotes electronic communication standards that allow the collision industry to be more efficient. We also provide webinars like this one to help educate both members and non-members alike. Today's presenters are Shivani Govil, Chief Product Officer for CCC, and Marc Fredman, Chief Strategy Officer of CCC. Marc Fredman has been with CCC since 2014. Before that, he provided strategic consulting with the Boston Consulting Group and J.P. Morgan Chase. Marc holds multiple patents in financial technology and transaction processing. Shivani Govil has previously held leadership roles at leading software companies, including Sage Software, SAP, and Agile Software, which is now Oracle. Her early career included strategy consulting at Andersen, as well as 2 Silicon Valley startups. We're very pleased to have the 2 of them join us today. As we start the webinar, I want to remind you that there is no verbal communication between the participants and the presenter. If you have questions during the webinar, please type them in the question panel on the webinar screen. We will answer as many questions as possible at the end of the presentation. And now I'll turn the program over to Marc.
Thanks, Paul. It's great to be here. It's also great to be here with all the attendees. We're excited to have the session today, and we're looking forward to hopefully getting back to doing these types of things in person in the near future. We are in particular very excited to talk about a topic that is near and dear to Shivani and I, which is how we use AI and networks to really change the claims repair experiences. I am mostly going to start off the presentation talking about some very broad macro trends, in particular things that not just impact things that we're seeing in our industry, but things that we're seeing in multiple industries, every industry around the world. And then Shivani will go much more into detail around specific technologies and ecosystems and experiences that we're seeing in our industry. As Paul mentioned, I lead strategy for CCC. I've been doing strategy for many years. One of the things that I always like to talk to people about when you think about the future is to start by focusing on inevitability. And so for me, inevitability is usually pretty easy to spot. And I think you'll find that too in your own business, whatever that might be. And so the key is really to think about what those inevitabilities are and then align your business so that you can take advantage of those things as they start to materialize in the future. And so when we look at those inevitabilities, we really see 2 twin related but fundamentally different inevitabilities. The first is complexity. And there is a massive long-term rise in complexity in this industry. We'll talk about those things. And at the same time, there is a long-term rise in the demand from everyone for simplicity. And those things, again, are related, but still fundamentally a little bit different. So let me start with complexity, and let me start with maybe the most fundamental aspect of what we do every day in this industry, which is the physical structure of the car itself. If you take a car back in 1996, this particular vehicle, you can see that it had a certain number of parts on that bumper. And if you fast forward to today, what you see today is that obviously the parts on those bumpers have essentially doubled. And so that has caused a tremendous amount of increase in complexity, literally in just the structure of the car. And that does not include things like, the physical materials that are used in the vehicle, which obviously have gotten much more exotic and esoteric and other types of complexity. And so certainly we see that complexity again at the most fundamental aspects of the car. But of course, it's not just that there's more parts and things, but you're starting to see that those things are playing out in terms of very dramatic increases in cost. And so that is playing out in essentially all claim types. But in particular, if you look at the trends, which you'll see is that those costs have been increasing disproportionately more recently. And if you zoom in on newer makes and model vehicles, that's really where costs are going the fastest. I'm sure everybody on here is probably familiar with some of the reporting that we do, crash course and other types of things. There's lots of stats we publish on this. but those costs are really being borne out, again, across all aspects of the repair process. And you see that playing out in parts, labor, paint, really everything. There's some pretty broad-based increases there. The other thing to keep in mind is that it's not just that the costs are going up, but it's also becoming much more complicated operationally to deal with all these different things. Now, in addition to more parts and more complicated parts, we have much more mechanical content in vehicles than we've ever had before. And so that's led to, in our industry, the rise of diagnostics, whether that is scanning, calibration, so that we can make sure that certain systems, whether they are adaptive cruise control, lane departure systems, et cetera, how did those things, were those things damaged in an accident? And if so, were they repaired properly after the repair was completed? And we've seen in our industry since 2017 a more than 900% increase in the rate of vehicles that are having some kind of diagnostics procedure done to them. And again, that creates a lot of complexity, not just in terms of how to deal with those things, but how to actually do them in terms of equipment and the like. And if you take that a step further, as you start to think about ADAS more generally, what we see is that there's going to be a lot more complexity even beyond the physical car itself. So for example, what happens when your self-driving car gets into an accident? Who is at fault for that? Is it you? Is it the automaker? Is it the sensor maker, right? Which sensor maker? There could be all kinds of sensor and software that's based in that vehicle. How do you quickly and efficiently repair a vehicle that has some very advanced LiDAR arrays on that vehicle? How do you price an insurance policy for a vehicle that has those systems versus one that doesn't? So there's going to be all kinds of questions that come up, including things like, well, what happens if those systems are engaged when you are on a food delivery app to deliver some food? And so we're seeing all those different types of things, again, play out from a complexity perspective. So in addition to all the things that I mentioned, we also have the complexity that's borne out from new types of connectivity in the vehicle. These are just some examples of data that we see coming out of OEM telematics, over-the-air signals. This is actually just a sample of those things. There's hundreds of different fields that can become available, some of them quite esoteric, as you can see on this list here. And again, the ubiquity of that, how do you manage that data? How do you process it? All those types of things are going to become very complicated. And of course, that doesn't take into account things like the sensors we have in our mobile phones, which are with us at all times, and many other things. So when you think about all that complexity, as I said, one of the biggest things for, I think, all of the folks on this call and really the whole industry to think about is, how do you really manage that complexity, knowing that just today, there's still over 1 billion days that elapse every year between auto claims being opened and auto claims being closed. That's the complexity this industry is already dealing with. So if we're already at that level of complexity before all these new technologies haven't really become as common, how do we make sense of all that and make sure that we can lead into the future? And the only way to really do that is innovation. And what I like to think of, and this starts to transition into the simplicity point, what I like to think about from an innovation perspective is that at the end of the day, almost every great innovation at its heart is about simplicity. Now, you can take an innovation which is technically very complex, and it might be very difficult to deploy that innovation or to scale it out. But ultimately, when you think about the person receiving an innovation, it almost always feels like the world just got much simpler after the innovation was something that they could experience. And if you look at the thing that we most commonly associate with a breakthrough idea, the light bulb, it's actually a really great example of this. The light bulb, obviously, when it was introduced, was a marvel of simplicity. No longer did you have to light a fire with sticks or candles to create light. You could just turn it on. And again, it took a lot to really scale that innovation up. You needed manufacturing and parts distribution and electrical generation. But to the person experiencing a light bulb, it just felt really simple. And you can see that actually when the light bulb was first introduced, that's how it was marketed. It was introduced as the light that you just turn on. And one of the things that's important to understand about why we crave simplicity is a concept that's referred to in neuroscience as cognitive load. There's only so much decisions and information that we're really built to handle. And so as we have more information, more complexity, we look for ways to make our life simpler. We look for cognitive hacks and shortcuts and things that allow us to bring our life into balance. And so as complexity is going up on the rise, you're starting to see really strong demand and increased desire for people to have simplicity. You see this play out in what we refer to as the curated economy. And you think about curation that's really ultimately very different than personalization. People are used to seeing on Amazon, here's a bunch of stuff that you might like. This takes us a step further. So Stitch Fix will just mail you a box of clothes every month, and you keep what you want and you mail back the stuff that you don't. Spotify will curate music that it knows you're going to like, so you can just listen to that and not have to worry about searching through a bunch of stuff. The farmer's dog will mail you a box of food every month to feed your pet, right? Just feed your pet this. And we're starting to see technology really playing out in all these ways as well to really support this increased demand that we have for simplicity. One of the things that we're all familiar with now is how ubiquitous anything you can imagine really wanting to get a hold of, you can get through your phone. These are just some examples that you see here. One that I want to spend a minute talking about is something that I've used a lot more in the pandemic, and I know a lot of other people have, which is tap to get a meal, food delivery. There's been a huge increase in food delivery in the pandemic. But what's really interesting about the evolution of food delivery is that it's actually part of a very long-term trend towards simplicity. If you go back to the 18th century, 90% of all US employment was in agriculture and food production. And today that number is less than 10%. We've made it much more simple, and we can actually to get food, and we can now do other things. Back in 1850, 33% of all food that we ate was self-produced. We made it ourselves. Today, that number is less than 1%. And despite the rise in food television and celebrity chefs and all these things, the rise of food culture, still only 10% of people today say that they enjoy cooking. And so this is a long-term evolution towards simplicity. And as you see the cost of food production and food delivery continue to go down, this is why people believe that mega trend towards simplicity could drive a even more dramatic change in how we eat food across the multi-trillion-dollar food economy. Again, that's just one example of how this plays out in all kinds of industries around the world. Now, if tap to is interesting and simple, then what's even simpler than having to tap to get something? Well, it would just be speak to, right? And so you could just imagine something that you want and just say it out loud and speak it into existence. And the simplicity of that is really compelling, and that's why we've seen the rise of smart speakers in all kinds of different forms. And in fact, the allure of that simplicity for smart speakers is so compelling that the smart speaker is the fastest adopted technology in human history. And when you think about what's possible with a smart speaker and the power that it has, you're talking about an IoT device connected at all times to the cloud, powered by AI. You can ask a smart speaker to connect you to Wolfram's Alpha to compute almost anything you can imagine. Thousands of activities and skills, incredible power at your command. But the question is, what do we use all this technology for? And it turns out we use it for some incredibly basic things. The top 4 things that we use a smart speaker for in order: number 1, play me a song, so I don't have to take out my phone and press a button. Number 2, tell me the weather so that, God forbid, I don't have to just look outside and see for myself. Number 3, some piece of trivia. And number 4, something that I actually do quite often myself, is set a timer so that I don't have to walk over to the microwave and press a button. So again, we're not really doing very complicated things here. We're trying to find ways to make our life simpler through very advanced technology. Now, if you said even speaking is too complicated, what would be even simpler than that? Well, that would be just think to. And this is something that we actually are starting to see as well. There's a lot of different startups that are looking at how do you really bring and connect man and machine. Neuralink is a startup backed by Elon Musk that puts electrodes in your brain so that as you think of things, you can just make them happen. So you don't even have to open your mouth and speak them. And you can imagine that after we've done this, after we have all this incredible processing power available to you, again, we're probably not going to be splitting the atom. We're going to be setting a bunch of timers and asking ourselves trivia like, is Mr. T still alive? And the thing to keep in mind about simplicity and what's going on is that we as people don't compartmentalize experiences. So as a consumer, you have this need for simplicity, you experience that complexity, you bring those same things to work. And so it's not just your employees, or it's not just your consumers, your customers that are looking for that simplicity. It's also your employees. And in particular, it's important in this industry because as we bring in younger workers, they really need that technology, those enhanced data and information, AI and other types of technologies to help them to manage that complexity. And that's because something that I know, we talk a lot about in this industry is the brain drain that we have, losing skilled workers to retirement every year, all that knowledge going out the door. So again, simplicity is something that you have to do really across the board. And you might think to yourself, okay, that makes sense. So I should be thinking about what I should do to help to enable simplicity at scale for my business, my employees, and my customers. And that's true, but you can't really do it yourself. So one of the things that, especially as technology has become much more common, as networks have really proliferated, there's an opportunity to really think about how do you leverage your network in a really smart, intelligent way to help to drive those future experiences that Shivani is actually going to get into a little bit more coming up here. So whether you're a shop, an insurer, an auto manufacturer, parts supplier, any of those things, you have to think about your network and how you want to manage that in a dynamic way, because that network is going to change and evolve. You're going to want to work with new people, and those relationships and things are going to be very dynamic. And if it sounds complicated to do that, that's really because it is. When you think about managing a network, you can take any two nodes on a network, and you would only need one connection to link those things. But if you wanted to connect, say, 4 nodes on a network, then you actually need 6 connections. So the complexity increases non-linearly as your network expands. So that if, for example, you wanted to look at, let's say, 225 connections, well, that needs 225 nodes. That requires more than 25,000 unique connections to link that network together. And so again, as you think about the future, one of the things you need to be thinking about is not just how do you manage the complexity of operations, and not just how do you really drive simplicity for customer experiences, employee experiences, but how do you really federate those dynamic networks over time? And we see as a company that obviously has a lot of different companies, a lot of different users on our platform, 30,000 companies, 500,000 users. We see a lot of really interesting things. We see a lot of really cool innovations and different things that our customers and other people are using technology to drive those next generation experiences. And that is actually what I'm going to hand it over to Shivani to talk more about.
Great, thanks, Mark. And as Mark said, really delighted to be here with all of you. What I'm going to do in my section is talk a little bit about 3 things. One is I'm just going to quickly hit upon some macro trends that are driving our industry, building a little further from what Mark talked about. Then I want to go into discussing the power of technologies such as AI that allow us to do things in different ways and their impact and adoption across our industry. And third, I want to talk about the importance of those networks that Mark was just talking about and how we need to bring everything together to create those seamless experiences for our end users. What I did want to say is that this is a really exciting time to be in the industry. For all of you who are here, you probably feel the pulse of excitement, the opportunities that are in front of us, and what we can do to really deliver what all of us care most about, which is how do we make things better for our end consumers so that they can focus on what's most important to them and their lives. And so, let me start by really going into some of these macro trends that exist around us. Mark already touched upon complexity, and as he said, there's complexity across many different dimensions. If you look at the vehicle itself, there's complexity in terms of how the cars are built and designed. For example, today a typical car contains thousands of functional components, tens and thousands of parts, and millions of lines of software code. And this, by the way, has increased exponentially over the years and will continue to do so. On top of this, there's complexity in terms of driving behaviors, distractions while driving, traffic flows, etc. The second trend that I wanted to touch a little bit on, which impacts us, is around the social trends. the prevalence of sharing and circular economies and gig workers. That's leading to the adoption of things like ride-sharing apps. There are many people, many younger people that I interact with that have told me they don't even want to own their own vehicle because it's so much easier for them to take an Uber or Lyft to get wherever they need to. In fact, there's some estimates that put the number of Lyft and Uber drivers between 2.5 to 5 million in the US alone. So these have an impact on how we think about the vehicles themselves, the insurance around them, and the repair process. The third trend that I'd like to touch upon is the technology innovations. And we'll go deeper into some of the areas such as AI, mobile, telematics, but there are others as well that are happening around us. In fact, the pace of technology innovation is continuing to accelerate. And the beauty of that is that it creates opportunities for us to think about doing things in ways that are different and create better experiences. The fourth one, regulatory pressures, and this is not something new. We've always had this around us, but something that is very mindful and relevant to the industry we play in. Things like new laws, whether it's state or local laws that are changing, or areas like rights to repair, or regulations around data and privacy and how you manage consent. These are all things that we have to constantly be aware of and mindful of. And then, of course, a discussion these days wouldn't go untouched if there wasn't a discussion around some of the economic uncertainties. We've all been living through the pandemic, and we're seeing an increase in traffic flows, which is great. It's still not back to pre-pandemic level, but there are more cars out on the road. That being said, there's still question marks around the new variants and how that's going to impact the future, and is it going to put a pause, or are things going to continue to move forward? And other events like natural disasters and political instabilities that all create to this economic uncertainty, which then does come back and impact our industry. And then if you flip to the next slide, there's another part that I want to talk about, which is the increased consumer expectations. Marc talked about the tap to example, which I love. And it's so true. Consumers have gotten used to interacting in a way that's so different from what they used to in the past. And as they do this in their personal lives, the expectation is that this is the way everything should function. And so they expect it in every interaction that they have. This is not just consumers, this is also employees who would expect such experiences in the work that they do. Now, you can tap to and order, decide what music to play or what the weather is. But if you take that into the scenario that we play in, the automotive collisions and repairs are much more complicated because there are hundreds of touch points that need to come together. So it's really about how do we as an industry provide this experience that consumers expect and demand in a way that allows us to deliver to their expectations, but also ensure the work is being done in the right possible manner. And you'll hear the excitement in my voice around this, because meeting customer expectations and delivering these types of seamless experiences allows us as an industry to take a stressful situation like an accident and enable that to be handled with care and simplicity, so that our customers can focus on what's most important to them and their life. If you click to the next slide, I'm going to just draw this out with an analogy to what we've been through, the journey we've been through. And many of you may or may not remember the analog world where we dealt with a lot of paper. When we moved to a digital environment, if you click one more, we went from paper-based to the mainframe, then the PC, the web, the mobile. Marc shared some stats on the adoption of different technologies, and we see that continuing to evolve. But more importantly, when this is applied to the space that we work in, it's about what are the benefits that we can create. And moving from paper to digital allowed us to deliver benefits such as increased efficiency, improved accuracy, better cycle time, creating an audit trail, etc. And we're moving even further to the next wave, which is what we consider as intelligent digitization. Benefits of this phase is going to include, on top of everything that we saw before, the ability to be more proactive in terms of preventing things from happening in the first place or providing support when something does happen. The ability to predict and take action. The ability to guide our users and our customers. For example, if you're repairing a car and you order a part, we're all familiar with recommendations when we're doing shopping online. But imagine if you are a technician and you need a part to fix a car, and there's an adjacent, a corollary part that's needed along with that part, and the system can immediately tell you or recommend to you that if you're ordering this part, you also should consider ordering this. And then consistency, in addition to the guidance and recommendation, it's about consistency in how things are done. So let's go deeper into what does this mean for our collision industry. Now, as Mark showed earlier, people have gotten used to engaging in different ways. Mobile is a default adoption across all the consumers to some extent. If you think about today, I have young kids at home, and many of you may have that as well, young adults, who would much rather prefer doing anything on their mobile devices than on even a desktop or computer. And God forbid they have to talk to someone, they would much prefer to chat and have the situation taken care of via chat and text messages. Based on a Hanover study that was conducted recently, it was found that 80% of consumers prefer interactions via the mobile channel. And so if you take that as a given, what you're seeing is that the importance of mobile and chat is increasing. And on top of that, if you layer that with capabilities such as video and photo, you enable even more powerful things to happen. So for example, a consumer who's involved in an accident can just use their mobile device to take a photo and send this into their carrier or their repair facility. By applying computer vision, AI, and deep learning technologies, we can immediately understand the damage on the vehicle and be able to come up with an estimate of how much it would cost to repair the vehicle. In fact, today, over 20% of industry repairable claims are being processed by photo estimates from mobile devices. Now, CCC, just a fact from our company, CCC has over 100 insurers on our mobile platform, and we've seen more than 100% growth in the number of companies using 2 or more deep learning applications for claims processes. In fact, according to a McKinsey study, 50% of claims activities will be powered by AI by 2025. So that's just some data to show how these types of technologies are helping in the industry we're in today. The other area that I'd like to touch upon is telematics. So if you go to the next slide, technologies like telematics, as Mark mentioned earlier, can provide important information. And there's 2 aspects to the type of information that it can provide. One is information on the vehicle itself. What are the features of the vehicle? What is the ADAS capabilities? What are the safety features, etc. And the second is information about the driver and the driving behavior. Is this somebody who accelerates fast, does a hard brake? Do they take a lot of rights or lefts? What time of day do they travel, etc. And these data, with the right consent, of course, can be very helpful in informing the user-based behavior and the vehicle-based understanding to be helped in underwriting and create policies that reflect user-based driving behaviors. According to research by SPD, it estimates that there will be about 36 million connected vehicles in US by the end of 2021. And this number continues to grow, leading to a lot of interesting things that we can do with the data. For example, telematics data can also be extremely helpful in understanding the impact of a collision and the extent of injury involved. There's data that shows that there's a 90% decrease in cycle time of first notice of loss through the use of telematics. This is important because it allows us to then offer help to the individual when they need it, of course, with the right consent in place. And the data can also be used to understand key parameters at the time of the accident, such as what was the speed of the vehicle, deconstruct critical crash parameters, and understand both the auto-physical damage as well as the bodily damage that might have occurred. If you go to the next slide, I want to play a video showing two vehicles and how they are interacting with each other as they approach an intersection. I think you might have, yes, there we go. And if you look at this video, at the time of crash, you can see that the telematics data can capture important information such as the speed, the engine speed, the location of the accident, whether the door was open or closed, whether the passenger driver seats were buckled, what the headlight status was. If it's raining, it can give us that information as well. The airbags, etc., whether the airbag was deployed or not, etc. And that data, if you go to the next slide, can then be further deconstructed to help you understand both the point of impact, the force of impact, the change in velocity or delta V. And when you layer this on with photos, if you go to the next click, it can allow you to even simulate the crash depending on your make model of the vehicle. You can understand the extent of damage and where that damage would have occurred. And when you combine the telematics data with the photo and AI capabilities, this can yield a rich amount of insight into the crash itself, allowing both the carriers to estimate the damage as well as repair facilities to understand and estimate the extent of damage and the repair that will be needed. Now, this is on the auto physical side. If you go into the next slide, we also have done a lot of data and understanding using injury sciences and real world studies to understand the impact on human bodies so that we can deconstruct the extent of bodily injury that could have been caused based on the speed, the delta V, the angle of sitting, the body type, which can then help us understand and inform the casualty side, both from a claims perspective as well as from a medical support perspective. So you can see that all this data that we're getting is allowing, as an industry, us to be able to do much more in terms of understanding what the accident involved is and how do we help fix the situation to help the consumer get back to their lives. If you go to the next slide, I wanted to play a quick video that walks through a scenario to illustrate this. And so in this scenario, you will see someone who's driving home who gets into an accident. Now, all of us have a lot going on in our busy lives, and no one wants to add more work to their plate. So a situation like this is very stressful. And instead of having to deal with the hassle of taking care of administrative work on this, imagine if we can simplify the claims process by just asking for a few photos from the person who got into the accident. And then once they take the photos, they can send it to their carriers via the mobile application. The carrier will be able to use that to give an estimate of the damage, and they can even go into line level details to get a more detailed view of what that extent of damage is. Now, as you think about this situation, let's take it a step further because, depending on the extent of the damage and whether the car is drivable or not, it's possible when you think about that network to be able to order a tow truck or, find the closest repair facility that would be able to fix the situation. And technology allows us to even connect with the repair facilities, schedule the appointment, give them access to the information so that they can have everything ready when the consumer comes in, and take care of that consumer either right at the moment or arrange a vehicle for them to take a rental or ride back to their home while the car is in the shop. Now, a lot of this may seem hypothetical, but I want to say that it's real today. That's the exciting part, is all this is happening today, and it's possible for us to do, especially as you think about both the technology side of it and the network side of it. Now, if you go to the next slide, I also want to talk about, because we've been talking a lot from a consumer perspective, how do we make things easier? But as Marc mentioned, this type of expectation of simplicity and ease of use is an expectation that exists in our own employee bases, whether at the carrier side, the repair shop side, the paint side, the towing company side. And so as you look at this digital transformation, it's about how do we create that seamless experience for the people who are delivering these solutions. We want to give carriers the ability to provide estimates faster, to be able to reduce cycle time, and process more claims in a timely manner. Similarly, if you go into the next slide, the importance is on the repair side. We want to give employees the ability to interact seamlessly with the customers, whether it's on the fact that they have to schedule appointments and allowing them to schedule that online, to interact with their customers using modern ways of communication like chat, text, video, etc., providing continuous updates to customers so that they know the status of their vehicle at any given point and there are no surprises. Or using technologies to understand and create an accurate estimate the first time and intelligently order the parts that are needed so that they can have things ready and meet their repairs in the right time and manner. If you go to the next slide, what we're finding is that these types of technologies significantly help transform the entire process lifecycle. So from a repair cycle time perspective, from the time of accident to the checkout, we have found a significant improvement going from 49 plus days to about 32 days in terms of that entire process, reflecting a 33% decrease in that cycle time. Now, this is just the beginning. There's a lot more we can do, which can help bring that cycle time down even further. If you click to the next slide, I've been talking about the repairable aspect, but that's actually the same that we're seeing on the total loss side when the vehicle cannot be driven anymore. There's about 20% of auto claims in the US that result in a total loss. And digital technologies can help reduce the cycle time for total loss by 13 days. This means that the amount of time a consumer who is out of a vehicle can be back into another vehicle becomes much faster, addressing customer satisfaction and NPS. So let me now shift real quickly to the network side, which I've been talking about through this conversation, but I did want to spend a little bit of time on this to underline the importance of the network. You know, today many of us have gotten used to network businesses without even realizing it. We order food for delivery through an app, and this is made possible because of the large network operating behind the scenes. The network of restaurants, the drivers for delivery, the closest being able to identify the closest driver to bring the food to us in a timely manner, the network of payment networks, and the suppliers that help fulfill the restaurant. Now, imagine if any step in this process was done offline. For example, if you had to order the food separately and then find a driver separately. This would greatly diminish that experience and result in poor adoption. This is exactly what's happening in our industry and what you saw in that video that we shared earlier. It's a strong network of connections that need to come together to create one experience for the customer. For example, after an accident, how do these steps happen seamlessly where a photo can be sent to the insurance company who can provide an estimate and direct the customer to a repair facility? The repair facility can have the same photos uploaded and in turn order the parts that are needed, be able to provide the estimates, and be ready to take in the car that comes in. Similarly, can we get the towing companies to the point of accident where needed, or get a rental or alternative car company ready to take them back to where they need to go? And then in the event of a total loss, how can that vehicle value be determined and the payoffs for the lenders or the lien holders happen in a seamless manner? And if there's an event of a bodily injury, how can we ensure that the carriers, the medical providers, and others can work together to make sure the best quality of care is provided and bills are paid in a rapid manner? This is the importance of the network that comes together to make these seamless experiences happen. Now, this is, as I said, just the beginning. And if you think about technology evolutions, there's so much more happening. You know, there's technologies like blockchain that are coming down that allow us to think about, you know, identity management, vehicle management, parts management, invoice and claims processing. You think about drones and the ability for them to help take photos in difficult or hard to navigate stop positions and areas. The ability to use AR and VR for training workforces or providing expert advice as somebody's fixing a vehicle, and the power of 3D printing, where, you know, something is in a repair facility and there's a part that's needed. Can you 3D print something urgently if you need to, without having to lose time on the repair? These are just some examples. There's so much more that you can do with these technologies, but others as well. So really what I want to close with and what I want to leave this team with is digital transformation is upon us. It's accelerating the way we work and opening new opportunities for the future. As we look at the next 3 years, we believe the future is going to be around straight-through processing, networks, and simplifying things to make them seamless, connected, and end-to-end. The future is ours to embrace, and the possibilities are endless. And we look forward to this exciting future ahead. And with that, thank you all, and I will hand it back to you, Paul, for questions.
Thanks, Shivani. Very interesting presentation. Stacy Phillips, CIECA's marketing director, has been monitoring the webinar for questions. Stacy, have we received any questions from the attendees?
Yes, our first question is, what does the adoption curve look like for mobile and AI among insurers and shops? And what can we expect from the next wave of technologies?
I can take that one, and Marc, feel free to add to it. So, you know, as I was talking about earlier, I think mobile and AI are here to stay. Mobile in particular, as we've talked about in the study, we found that 80% of consumers prefer interactions via the mobile channel. Even in the shop floor and the carriers, mobile is unleashing a lot of capabilities that allow people to do their work in different ways. And, you know, if you combine that with the ability to take photos, if you use mobile to take photos and then be able to layer that with the AI technologies, you can provide better and faster, you can provide faster estimates and better estimates if you think about consistency and how do you get those estimates in a more systematic manner. You can also look at AI in other areas, such as conversational interactions, or being able to identify and detect patterns and anomalies. You know, can you help predict when a customer is going to leave you as a carrier and go to a different carrier? There's so many use cases and scenarios where these can be applied. We have found in our own company, we have found that there's been a strong growth in the number of users or number of situations where carriers are using 2 or more deep learning models. So we're seeing a very significant adoption in these technologies, and it's here to stay and keep us moving forward.
Yeah, I was just going to add to what Shivani said. I mean, I do think that people on the call and I think in the industry should understand that these are not technologies we're talking about coming. These are technologies that have been here and are actually being deployed at some very large scale. If you think about the mobile side, Shivani mentioned we've got 100 insurers that are using these things. We've seen huge growth there. We actually, on the shop side, introduced a solution that allows shops to actually take advantage of those same technologies. And we've now got almost a third of our entire shop base is using that technology. And on the AI side, again, this is something being used at very large scale. We've done millions, I think it's over 5 million claims using deep learning. We're seeing now, we just released that to the shops, and there's a lot of other companies also out there that are providing these types of things. It is absolutely, again, more of a new normal than it is something that we see coming in the horizon. Although certainly there's going to be a lot more adoption as we go forward.
Thank you, Shivani and Marc. Our next question is, how does CCC view the role of the human as AI becomes more widely used?
That's a great question. I can, again, kick it off, Marc, and feel free to add to it. One of the things that I fundamentally believe is technology is there to support humans, to help them do their work better. So, oftentimes I refer to AI as augmented intelligence. How can we enable our humans to perform what they need to do better, faster, and in a more efficient manner? Today, we know that a lot of our claims folks have to process a large number of claims. And how do we help them process those claims more efficiently? If you think about the complexity that we talked about in the vehicles getting more complex, how do we intelligently surface what are the parts or components that are needed to repair those vehicles? So as I think about this interaction, it's a very, very much an augmented, and how do we complement the work that humans do in order to be more effective and deliver better experiences to our end customers.
Excellent. How can my company maximize the value of these technologies as we look to address different points of the claims process?
I can take that. I think there's, again, this is, this is coming from the strategy guy, right? So, I always start to think about what is the overall strategy that you have in terms of how you want to take advantage of the future. I think we talked about a lot of different technologies earlier, but ultimately, as we said, it doesn't matter how powerful the technology is. Ultimately, you have to think about how does that actually get used in your business in a real context. And so I think that's why you see so many companies in this industry looking for help from platforms, help managing networks. I mentioned the complexity of managing a network before. Some of the math involved, with 225 connections, or 225 nodes, you need 25,000 connections. If you think about your business, many people have far more than 200 things they need to connect, because those could be employees, companies you do business with, systems, vendors, all those types of things. And so it always ends up happening that scaling complexity starts to hit people, and it comes non-linearly. So that's one of the things you have to really be thinking very proactively about, especially in a world where we are going to have so much more complexity. There's going to be connected car data. There's going to be diagnostics data. There's going to be other types of metadata. There's going to be all these different types of things. And so that would really be, I think, the biggest things for people to keep in mind.
Thank you. Our next attendee wants to know if you could please explain the difference in the percentage of time an insured is filing FNOL if their car is drivable versus non-drivable.
Yeah, I can take that. We have a wealth of information on our website and the different publications that we do. So I would actually encourage, in general, not just for this question, but for a lot of others, some really esoteric stuff in Crash Course and other things that can really get into a lot of those types of details. I think in general, one of the things that we want to be able to do, and I think this is, again, part of the expectation that consumers have, regardless of how that claim is started, regardless of how that claim is detected, and regardless of what path it goes down, we want to have it be fast, accurate, and a great customer experience. And so a lot of what we try to do is try to figure out, and I think what everybody wants to try to figure out is, how do you take those experiences that today are maybe not great, right? I mean, a claim in general is not going to be inherently is going to have its disruption and things to your life, but how do you try to minimize that as much as possible? Shivani talked about on the total loss side, which is where a lot of non-drivables end up going, that there's really a tremendous amount of opportunity there to streamline that process, and whether that is helping to identify first notice of loss faster, whether it's helping to resolve liens and title transfers faster, the salvage process, all of those things. Again, those are things that we're already seeing people make some really big strides, but also we think there's a lot more opportunity to go forward.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much. That's all the questions we have for now, Paul. Thanks for the excellent presentation.
Great, thank you. Marc, Shivani, thank you very much, both of you, for joining us today. That was a really insightful and interesting presentation. Obviously, the world is changing fast, and there's a lot happening quickly. CIECA has partnered with the Automotive Management Institute. Attendees of this webinar are eligible to receive credit towards a professional designation from AMI after taking a short quiz on the website. A link will be sent to all attendees. Please follow CIECA's social media platforms to stay up to date on upcoming events and CIECA news. And that concludes today's webinar. Thank you.